Good morning. I'm going to call to order the meeting of the Zoning and Planning Committee for Thursday, February 15th. My name is Jeremy Schrader, and I am the chair of this committee. With me at the dais are Council Member Ellison, Vice Chair Reich, and Council Member Gordon. Let the record reflect that we have a quorum. Ish. We will have a pretty full agenda today, including 2 appeals. Before going into our quasi-judicial hearing, we'll act on the consent agenda. For item 3 is the approval of the application submitted by Abubakar Isaki Islamic Center to rezone the property located at 2824 13th Avenue South from an I-1 light industrial district to an OR2 high-density office residential district to renovate and construct an addition of an existing building in order to establish a K-12 school and restaurant. Item 4 is the approval of the application submitted by James McNeil Architecture and Design to rezone the property located at 4324 Lake Harriet Parkway West to an R1 single-family district, from an R1 single-family district to an R4 multifamily district, to allow a cluster development for 4 dwelling units. Item 5 is the denial of an application submitted by A&M Market LLC to rezone the property located at 2425 West Broadway from a C1 neighborhood commercial district to the C2 neighborhood corridor commercial district to allow a new tobacco shop within an existing building. Item 6 is the approval of an application submitted by the Minneapolis Public Schools to vacate the remainder of an existing alley on the north end of 2526 Emerson Avenue South, subject of the retention of the easement rights by CenturyLink. Item 7 is the setting of a public hearing for our March 1st meeting to consider 3 apartments to the Rezoning Board of Adjustments. And finally, items 8 through 18 are 11 ordinances that are being referred to staff. These ordinances were originally introduced during the previous council term and were reintroduced at last week's council meeting and forwarded to this committee in order to continue progress forward. Are there any questions from committee members? With that, I'll move the consent agenda. All those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say no. The ayes have it, and the motion carries. Next, we'll begin our quasi-judicial hearings. Item 1 is the appeal submitted by Dom Gerberling on behalf of Master Properties Minnesota regarding the Rex 26 project. Let's begin with the staff presentation.
Good afternoon, Chair and Commissioners, committee members. The appeal from the January 2018 Planning Commission meeting is for looking at the project at 26th and Lindale. There were 5 applications that were required: a CUP for height, a variance to increase the FAR from 2.5 to 3.4, 2 yard variances, and a site plan review. CPED recommended approval of all those applications, and the Planning Commission denied the FAR request, the variance to increase the FAR, and site plan review. I'll just note that, as you see in the packet and the staff report, the project was reviewed and approved by the Planning Commission twice before that January 2018 review. Just an image of the most recent proposal. I'll get to these tables in a minute, but just showing the differences between what was approved in the last version in July of 2017 and what was proposed in January 2018. I have 8 images or renderings provided by the applicant showing the differences. The big thing is going to be 11,000 square feet of additional bulk on the top floor, and that would add 11 units, but many of those other elements of the project, the design, the materials, and the 21,000 square foot grocery store on the first floor did not change between what they have approvals for and are currently building and what they're proposing to do today. Just highlighting where that additional bulk is proposed. Here there would be more along the east elevation by the alleyway and residential buildings. This, you would have more windows and more bulk closer to that alley once again and closer to the apartment building here. But one of the positives that staff saw was more windows and eyes on the alley closer to the on that upper floor. This is tough to, I do have the July 2017 and January 2018 shadow studies, and we did not see a major difference between the two. All right, so the applicant provided this comparison of what they received approvals for and what they're proposing today, and that just shows the additional gross floor area proposed on the 5th floor. The reasons for denial by the Planning Commission for the FAR and the site plan review were that circumstances were solely based on economic consideration and that there are no practical difficulties on the site. And also note that the Planning Commission spent a lot of time reviewing the design of this project over the last 2 years. So those were the reasons that they gave for recommending denial of those 2 applications. There were a lot of letters from the public for this project, and a number of them in the original Planning Commission review were letters of opposition. The addendum public comments and those that came in prior to this meeting, there were quite a few letters of support that I believe that you have access to electronically. And I'm almost done here, but I'll just the changes that the developer has proposed since the appeal. They are willing to do additional glazing along the 26th Street elevation. There was a vertical garden in this area for the residents that they are willing to incorporate into the new development. Designed for the project to be solar ready and to have 3 of the 11 new units be affordable housing, but at an 80% AMI. And that this would be, they are committed to doing that if they do or do not, if they do not get funding or if they don't get tax credits or some additional public funding to have even more units, and the developer can talk about that. Those 4 bullet points or 4 elements of the project were recommendations of approval by the neighborhood association in their letter. And just to wrap up, the applicant in their bringing this project forward for the 3rd time was open that this additional number of units was needed to make for financial reasons and unforeseen circumstances caused by their major commercial tenant.
Excuse me, I have a question from Councilmember Gordon. Goodman, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And this might be a question for Mr. Nelson too, but I'm not sure. Because we're looking at the site plan review at this point, we could incorporate the additional 4 points from the neighborhood association without granting the appeal, correct? Demand additional glazing, put in a garden, and the other 2 things that the neighborhood asked for. Since the site plan's in front of us, we don't necessarily have to approve the appeal to add those as conditions, correct?
I believe that is the case, that those 4 additional elements could be included. Can
you note where those are in our packet then, please?
Yeah, it's going to be buried, but okay. So for the Planning Commission packet, letter 6 is going to be, or else you know what I can do, Councilmember Goodman?
During the public hearing, maybe we can.
And I can put it right up here.
That'd be great.
Yeah. So, in wrapping up, staff did support the project for the following reasons. The small area plan guidance was to have greater intensity between 26th and 28th Street along Lindale Avenue. And we want mixed use developments like this along commercial corridors. And we did see the applicant retaining the design elements that were important to have the building try to fit in as much as possible, knowing that it will be bigger than its surrounding context. So that concludes my presentation. Happy to answer questions you may have.
Well, thank you. I did want to check in with council to see that this is what Councilmember Goodman suggested is something we can do right now.
Committee members, I think Mr. Hanauer is going to check on those specific provisions, but if I heard Councilmember Goodman correctly, she asked about whether we would grant or not grant the appeal. Keep in mind that the appellant is appealing some some applications that have been denied. So without granting an appeal, those applications are then essentially dead, and the applicant would revert back to the approvals that they have, which they are currently proceeding under construction with.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Goodman.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Is that because they're already under construction?
Correct. Councilmember Goodman, they are under construction, at least excavation, based on previous planning commission approvals for a smaller building.
So it potentially tells you the absurdity of it, that if it's something the developer wants, we can change it, but if it's something the community wants, we can't.
To be clear, if there are conditions of approval that we believe are legally defensible, that could be attached to an approval of the appeal and therefore approvals of land use applications, but not attaching a denial of land use applications subject to conditions of approval.
So that was a yes. I mean, I just want to make sure I understand. I understand that we can't add affordable housing to the project as a condition of approval, but I guess I would wonder why the glazing issue and the garden issue and the solar ready issue couldn't just simply be addressed since the site plan is again in front of us. I didn't bring the site plan in front of us again, the developer did, so that opens the door for us to add anything we might like too. And what I hear you saying is, no, that's not true. It only works one way.
Could I take one other stab at this? Okay, top image, they have the approvals for. It includes a number of the things the neighborhood wants. They want the glazing at this level. They have the vertical garden here, and the other part is being solar ready is something that would be above and beyond.
So those are in the 17 approval already.
Yes. Yes.
And they were taken out of the new submission. Add more density, take the good things out is kind of what the new submission is.
The bottom version is the larger version, and now the applicant is willing to commit to those 3 items. We'll talk about affordable housing because that's a little more complicated. But if you, with the additional 11,000 square feet of floor area, they're willing to do those 3 items that the neighborhood.
Okay, Mr. Chair, so I think I do understand this now. So if we deny the appeal, we get the 2017 project, which had the things that the neighborhood listed other than the affordable housing in them.
And I would say I don't know if that building was solar ready or it was going to be designed to be solar ready.
But you're saying we can't potentially add that?
Mr. Chair, Councilmember Good, no, absent granting the appeal and approving this new site plan app amendment, which would give you the opportunity to impose conditions on an approval. Outside of that, no. If it remains denied, if you deny the appeal, deny the site plan, he still has his pre-existing approvals, and that's what stands.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions for staff? Oh. President Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just do want to note that for that 2017 approval, there was a significant amount of feedback from staff and the Planning Commission, multiple visits to the Committee of the Whole, as well as a lot of feedback from neighbors. And the design was changed very significantly from the beginning to when it was approved based on all of that feedback. Which was reflected in the comments that you just made, Aaron. But,
absolutely.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for staff? All right, thank you. With that, before I open the hearing, I'll give the applicant the opportunity to speak to the committee. Is there a representative or representatives here to speak? And can you state your name for the record, please?
Good morning,
Good morning.
Chairman and Vice Chairman and the members of the committee, council members. My name's Don Gerberding, and I'm with Master Properties. We're at 201 West Broadway here in Minneapolis. Thank you for your time this morning. I'd also like the opportunity to introduce Mark Vannelli, who's the owner of this project, Master Properties as the applicant, as the developer. This project, we're all familiar with this project, so I won't belabor, but I think it needs to be said that if we look at the criteria, excuse me, I've got a cold here this morning, we do check, this project does check all the boxes for a mixed use. And plus it creates 25 full-time jobs in neighborhood jobs in the neighborhood within the grocery store. So just by review, again, in July 17, the project received full approvals, and we have now returned with an application for an increased FAR in a review of the site plan. And so in January, the Planning Commission did grant all of the variances, and they granted a CUP for 6 feet in additional height of the building over the code. So quick background, since the time of the previous approvals, the tenant structural requirements changed, and as the project was fully developed since that previous approval, the tenant requirements became known, and they just impacted the project structural costs. These requirements and changes were unknown at the time of the last approval. And only when the plans became more detailed did we understand what the structural changes really were comprised. As one knows, when a project comes in front of the Planning Commission, it could be 30, 40, 50% developed, but then after the approvals, and one understands it's a real project, that's where the engineers and the architects and all the details really come out. So today we're here today to ask for a consideration of an FAR increase as well as the corresponding site plan approval. It may seem like we're going backwards by requesting today the FAR and the site plan approval. But I have to say we're not going backwards. We spent 3 years trying to make this project work. We've been exploring solutions all along the way. The solutions the difficulties were trying to find a space in a design on a difficult site to allow a neighborhood grocery store. What we do now know, the tenant is Aldi, and this is a new urban market concept. It's a neighborhood market. It's brand new in the country, and they're rolling it out here in Minneapolis. We also now know the operational requirements required by Aldi. This particular site was difficult in that the alley raises 5 feet from the 26th Street to the south end of the project, where Lyndale Avenue doesn't raise 5 feet. So how do we get access in and out of the building? That was the engineering difficulty. We also now know that we're able to offer an affordable housing component. Working with our financial consultants, we are able to do this on a voluntary basis. We are not going backwards, like I said. We now know all these things to move the neighborhood forward. That's the essence of our request today. I'd like to introduce you to Mark Vannelli, who is the owner of this project, and Mark can talk a little bit about his background and why he's so passionate about this project. Mark?
Good morning. My name is Mark Vannelli, and I live at 2401 West 52nd Street. I've lived there for 13 years, and prior to that, I lived for 15 years at 5201 3rd Avenue South. So I am an expanded neighbor, and I have been for the last 30 years. I'm interested in solar ready. I'm interested in demassing our city corners. I've built, I've owned, I've financed projects all over this city with people that you've all blessed projects for. I decided to do something a little different, and that was to listen to both you, your previous committees, architects, developers, neighbors, my wife. I've been interested because I'm going to own this, and I plan to own it long term. I plan for my kids to own it, and that's the way my other properties are. And when Don introduced me to this project, which actually he had been working on prior to me being involved. I actually took the initiative to change it based on the way that I thought it should be done, based on what I knew. For example, the Councilmember Bender wanted to see happen on this corner because it was such an important corner. As you probably know, across the street is French Meadow. Catty Corner is Common Roots with Danny Schwartzman. We've got Nightingale. We've got Lynn Hall now, and all the way down the road. It's a great, beautiful, cursory, bohemian, uptown neighborhood with a great streetscape. I want to maintain that. I want this to be a beacon in that, but not an obnoxious beacon. So as we got going with this, we found out that Aldi really likes this site because Aldi believes that, first of all, it's a highly stressed area, both from a rent perspective and a food desert. So would I rather have done mixed use just from a risk perspective? Absolutely. Multi-tenant spaces are much less risky than single-tenant spaces, especially if you don't have a long-term lease, which we do, which is one of the reasons why you would accept a credit like this in its single-tenant nature. But as it turns out, we were in good faith working with them, and we decided to keep working with them after the initial approvals of this project. As that went along, we learned how to adapt to what they wanted based on interior loading, how to load, how to turn, how to get in and out of the space in marriage with our residents, which will be living above, creating this symphony of communal, mixed-use, urban, infill location. Commissioner Kronzer, in our previous approval, who has endorsed this project, Councilmember Goodman had asked us to consider a lot of changes to the exterior and aesthetics, and we wholeheartedly agreed. That was not something that we were not interested in doing anyway, as long as it wasn't financially constraining. I.e., we added we kept the materials on the exterior of this building to 2. And not only 2, instead of a specific and generic metal, we went to tiles, which are more expensive. Metal tiles on the building, just metal tiles, not metal vertical seam, metal tiles. And we specifically went with the tile and the profile of the library in Uptown. And because it's a lovely facade, it's a beautiful aesthetic acumen to the property. And then we went with the brick towers and aesthetically pleasing streetscape. The other thing that we did, which I think was very important to note, is we initially were going to build the podium at 22 feet, 23 feet, because we thought we had to based on the topography difference. The reason I bring this up is because we went back to Board Member Bender and let her know that we think we can drop it, because she was concerned about the massing along Lyndale, and we did. We dropped it 3 feet. So it made for a very we tried to bring in the massing down toward the street so it wasn't so voluminous above. So when we were denied at the last Planning Commission meeting, I asked Don to think about how we could provide a way to take this and make it an opportunity. And I think if I could appeal to you for an additional 11 units, which essentially is an expansion horizontally, and maintain the relief that we've drawn in a very thoughtful and strategic way to try to keep the massing down, i.e. pulling it off of the hard corner of Hennepin, Glendale and 26, and then provide the relief we've shown along the alley. We're not asking to just repeat the 4th floor. That's not what we're asking, which, by the way, we have entitlement to build 8 units on the 5th floor already. So we're just not, I guess I'm using the word just, but we're asking for a modest increase in FAR horizontally, yet maintain aesthetically the relief that you would get on the 3 corners, or I guess it would be the 26 side, the alley, and Lindale. The partnership that I'd like to suggest we have an opportunity to join on is, with those additional units, I, in my metrics and our modeling, allow us to do a certain amount of affordable, which I would like to do. I honestly would like to do. I don't have in my possession a way to financially offset that like many other developers get in the form of TIF, grants, credits. I don't have that. I'm just taking that right off the top and saying, should we introduce, because we have an opportunity, we obviously are providing a discount grocer, as we all know. That's their focus for this area, being a food desert. Let's put a few units here in the form of affordable. And I would suggest that we provide you and the community, which I'm part of, 3 additional units, or 3 units of the 11 that we're asking for in the count, toward affordable units. And I think Aaron mentioned 80% of AMI, and I actually think that we could support 60% of AMI. So it's a way for those units to be available to somebody that wants to live in a great location like this in the city, and yet be in there in an affordable way. You know, to say we could go higher, I'd love to. I'd love to go higher in number of units. I honestly would. I would feel, it would feel great to be able to provide more affordable housing at this project, but I don't have a way of offsetting the constraints you receive in the discounting or the rent income. Obviously, the way that it works now versus before is I can add rentable square feet by getting an additional 11 units. So that's the olive branch. That's the way in which I would like the commission to consider approving the appeal. To speak to Council Member and Commissioner Member Goodman as to the solar ready and what the neighborhood wants, sure, I've met with 45 North Solar. Those guys are terrific. And we're working already toward how can we get solar on this roof to provide for a way to make this building more green. I can actually access better financing if I can try to make it more green. It's just cost, which I'm perfectly willing to do. By the way, just so you know, I don't know if this is known, I certainly could have gone with Magic Packs in design. I didn't. Everybody else that you're approving projects for are going Magic Packs. I mean, most of the wood stick construction projects are just going Magic Pack as a default. I'm not. I'm going heat pump, just like Lat 45 did. And I'm trying to be sympathetic to where we should be going with these apartments and how we're developing them. And I think what that does, it does 2 things. Number one, it allows for energy to be utilized if we do solar, if we get solar in some form or fashion, because these are electric. It does another thing. It allows more natural light in the unit because I'm not blocking a corner, 4x4 corner in the room on the exterior wall with a Magic Pack. That whole wall now is open. So I'm not, this is a situation where you probably can't do this based on developer distress financially. But what we're trying to do is it is stressful. Trust me, it's stressful financially because of the costs and the rising costs and the complications of getting this tenant in this building and creating this, what I think is a really interesting way in urban development. The same development was done in Buckhead in Chicago. It's a beautiful project and it received terrific recognition. This is a lot like it. And so anyway, I just want you to think about all the things that I said and whether you would consider your approval based on my offer to provide for some affordable.
Okay. Thank you very much. I want to acknowledge that we've been joined, I should have mentioned this earlier, by Council President Bender and Council Member Goodman. Also, we've been joined by a lot of other people. If you plan on speaking, please sign in with the clerk. Finally, I want to thank you for your testimony. With that, before I open the hearing, I've got a couple notes before opening this to the public. I respectfully ask that the testimony today is limited to new and unique comments. Once the comment is spoken into the record, there's no need to have it repeated. And the committee's vote today will be based only on the information that's on the record. I will also limit comments to 2 minutes per person. We will have the timer up and running. Once you're at the podium, please state your name and your address for the record. And additionally, if you have not already, as I mentioned before, please sign in. So if you forget to before you get up there, just stop over by the clerk. Do we have anyone interested in speaking on this project? Come on up.
My name is Peter Robinson. I live at 2648 Garfield Avenue, which is the same block that the gentleman before me was talking about. I have lived in Minneapolis since 1966. It is curious to me that I am limited to 2 minutes and the gentleman before me was allowed to speak as long as he wanted to. Now, when I moved to Minneapolis, I moved from the East Coast. This was the furthest west I had ever been in my life. I figured that I would live here for about 3 years and then move back to civilization. And what I found was a wonderful community. I found a place that was a really enjoyable place to live. And I have lived here ever since. I have not left. And I, as a matter of fact, do live in this community. Unlike the gentleman before me who says he lives in the community, but he lives on 50th Street, which is not within the community by any but human being's sense of the community. I now live on the very block where they have been demolishing my house for the last 2.5 months with pile driving, which they warned no one about, and which they claim they have the right to do from 7 in the morning until 6 at night. I do not yet know to whom I have to apply to have the repairs made on my house that have been caused by that pile driving. When I drove down here to this meeting, I noticed that the height of the buildings is suddenly a great deal higher when we are north of Franklin Avenue and less high when we are south of Franklin Avenue. So it seems that the encroaching plan here, not of the zoning commission, but of developers, is to develop height of buildings that will in fact exceed what is south of Franklin Avenue. The 2 buildings that are currently being built at Franklin and Lindale now exceed. Have I exceeded my 2 minutes?
Oh, you hit it, so if you wouldn't mind wrapping up.
What?
If
Wrapping
you wouldn't,
it up.
Yes, please.
Right. When I moved to Minneapolis, the population of the city was 425,000 people. It is now merely 380,000. It has not in a half century regained the population that it had before people fled to the suburbs. And one of the reasons they fled to the suburbs was because single affordable housing was being demolished.
Yeah, with all due respect, I was serious about wrapping up.
Excuse me?
If you could take the next 20 seconds and wrap up.
The appeal that you have is disingenuous. The first thing that they asked to be approved of, which was denied, was essentially what they are now asking for in their appeal. They were asking it for Trader Joe's. Now, Trader Joe's is owned by Aldi's, so they cannot now say with any honesty that Aldi's has changed their mind over what their requirements are. So the common sense thing is this, that once a project is started, you do not grant other appeals.
Okay, thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to speak? Also, please hold the applause.
Hello, my name is Blue Della. I am a renter at 3404 Emerson Avenue South, Ward 10, I believe. I wanted to speak in favor of this appeal. As a renter, as someone who moved to Minneapolis with the hope of living here a long time, but with the expectation that I will probably be a renter for much of that time, I believe that we are presented with a rare opportunity here of a developer who is sensitive to the realistic needs of this neighborhood and of its realistic future. It understands that it has a opportunity to create new units for a building whose primary tenant is an Aldi, and they understand that those units can be affordable, which I find to be a very reasonable match. And this is also a developer who lives in the area and understands that this is a city with a significant shortage of affordable units. And this area in particular is at risk of losing a lot of younger, hopefully long-term citizens like me. And when those citizens part from this neighborhood, that will be taking the good things out of that neighborhood. I want to encourage you to think about the future of people who rent in these units with the understanding that they are renting because they want to live in a city, and they want to live in the city that Minneapolis is becoming, which considers the environmental impact of these buildings, but also understands the rental needs of the city at this time. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to speak?
Hi, I'm Danny Schwartzman. I own Common Roots Cafe, which is just off of this drawing, just across the street, and I live at 2401 Lake Place. And I want to thank you all for giving me the opportunity to speak really quickly in less than 2 minutes. I submitted written comments. I hope you've had a chance to review those. Great. And I had a chance to meet with Mark and Don after the Planning Commission conversation, and I actually do appreciate it. I think that they do intend the right thing, and they'd like to see affordable housing here, which is great, and that's a great asset for our community, and I would love to see this building be an affordable housing building. I also believe that our planning process and our city processes should not depend purely on economics that developers create. The developers and the owner chose to work on a project with the expectation that they would be able to exceed our planning requirements that were already in place. They applied for variances and rezoning and multiple things, and they received many of them. That's in the past. I opposed those. I would continue to think that was a mistake, but they received those. And now they're coming and they're saying, well, we have a tenant, Aldi's, a giant multinational tenant, who we've decided to work with, and they have requirements that make it so that we cannot do things that we would otherwise have been able to do. So we must add more units. So we come to you, the council, to approve these extra units. That doesn't make any sense. The Aldi's could ask for whatever they want, and the developers and owner would have to figure it out. Now, I suggest to them, and I suggested this directly to them as well, if there's a problem with Aldi's, work with Aldi's. Maybe Aldi's is being unreasonable. Maybe they should find other tenants. Maybe other tenants could include great small community businesses, maybe a locally owned grocery store. This is certainly not a food desert. I'm glad that there's going to be a good grocer nearby. Wedge is right nearby. There's a lot of great locally owned grocery stores in this vicinity. I would hope that the developers and the owner can revisit this and look and see what can we do for our community that's positive. How can we really make this project be all about it? How can we have conversations? I had my first conversation with them after the approval, before the prior planning commission's approval. There was no outreach to me, despite being an immediate neighbor. I had that conversation. It was great. Then I did not hear anything until I got a letter in the mail saying that they were applying for an additional variance to exceed what they had previously gotten approved. So there was a good conversation we had. I think there's a lot that could be improved in this project. I support density. I support affordable housing. I support growing the neighborhood. I think there is a way to do it that meets it and is not purely based on economic considerations, which this application is transparently and directly based purely on economic considerations. I'll conclude with just the criteria for the floor area ratio.
I think you're out of time, unfortunately.
Unique circumstances not created by a person presently
thank you very much.
Property. Thank you.
there anyone else wishing to speak?
Hi, and thank you. My name is Sarah L Fring. I live on 2453 Lindale Avenue South. I'm a homeowner. I have a single family home. My concern regarding this project is I can appreciate the importance of improving and increasing density and of pushing for people to take transit and be pedestrians, etc. All those things that have been brought up already. My concern is, you know, I want to live in this neighborhood too. I want to live in a house and I want to have a backyard. I don't want to rent. I don't want to be surrounded by apartment buildings. I want to have other neighbors that are single family homes and have backyards. And I just feel that I can see this creep that is pushing me out. And I don't want to be pushed out. I want to live here too. And I'll keep it short since other people like to go over.
No, thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to speak?
Mr. Chair,
Oh,
perhaps
yes.
people who want to clap could do this.
That's a
instead
great
of clapping.
suggestion. Great suggestion.
Can I add 15 seconds?
No, you cannot. Is there anyone else wishing to speak?
So much for democracy.
Seeing no one, I'm going to close the public hearing portion of this and open it up to questions from the council. President Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to move to deny the appeal and just want to make some brief comments about that, and maybe others will want to as well. So this project has been long in development, and there were a number, months and months and months of conversation in the community. Like all new development in the 10th Ward, people were very passionate on both sides of the conversation, and we often hear here in chambers from folks who are opposed to projects, which makes a lot of sense, but there's a lot of support in the community for new development and new housing, and particularly in the current configuration of the Lena neighborhood organization, which again, in the 10th Ward, these organizations really kind of tend to cycle through, and there's a lot of differences of opinions kind of based on who's on the boards. Both the Wedge neighborhood and the Whittier neighborhood are 90% renter. And there's a lot of pressure on the renter populations in these neighborhoods as our city is growing. We actually have reached 420,000 people in our city, and we're projected to continue to grow far beyond that. And my renters are feeling a lot of pressure, and there is a need for more housing. We have a 2% rental vacancy rate, one of the lowest in the country. And those are the reasons that a lot of my constituents support new and needed housing in the community. That said, this project went through a number of months of review, conversations, and because the overall bulk of the building, it's a pretty long building, it takes up a number of parcels along the block, there was already a variance granted from 2.55 to 3.1 as part of the original appeal or applications. And so even though the increase may seem slight to 3.4, my position, I think, and I agree with the Planning Commission, is that, you know, we've already allowed for quite a large building on this site, and the approvals before should still stand. You know, I want to note that a lot of the design of this building has been driven by the grocery store. And, you know, there's clearly a demand for a grocery store. It's hard to believe because I live in this neighborhood. There are 3 grocery stores within walking distance of my house, and we frequently walk to them. But this is the second application in about 5 years for a grocery store very near this site. And, you know, my concern was that of the sites where you could consider putting a commercial use of that size, this one was already mostly vacant. The building had already been torn down. The previous application for a grocery store was going to end up tearing down a lot of existing buildings. And so if you think about where you might want to have a grocery store, if you have one along the Lindale corridor, this site seemed as good as any, probably the best that I could think of. But that said, again, you know, I think there's only so much that we can compromise on the design of the building to allow for a grocery store, and the economics of that use are really not our problem as a city. I think many in the community would prefer to see you know, the smaller scale retail that's really more in keeping with the scale of most of the rest of the corridor. There are a lot of people who are excited about a new grocery store as well. So all that to say, I think, you know, this project is certainly complex. All of these projects in the neighborhoods are, you know, we're trying to do infill development in already built out communities. There's a lot of passion about it. But I think in this instance, given the previous application, I think that we have allowed a building that fits in the best. And I think even the small expansion goes kind of back on our commitment to the design changes that we had asked for as staff and in my office through the community conversation on this project. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wholeheartedly concur with Councilmember Bender. I do want to ask the staff to draft findings of fact. For me, the most persuasive argument here is that there is just simply no practical difficulty that would require us to increase the FAR that's already been once increased. And I can see where there would be frustration on behalf of the neighbors when there's been so much compromise already to have a project that's under construction that's been so disruptive. And this one has been substantially disruptive. The pile driving is, you can hear that quite frankly, on the west side of Lake of the Isles. But that's the way construction works, I guess. But I will say that they just simply do not remotely meet the legal criteria for a variance of this kind. And I hope it will tell other developers not to come back when your project is under construction and you've already gotten quite a few things through that potentially others do not like, to come back and triple dip because I think it's blatantly unfair to neighbors to have to keep coming down and asking developers to abide by what is allowed under the ordinance.
Thank you, Councilmember. Are there any other comments? Any other questions? Well, before taking a vote, I will say for my own, I will be voting to deny the appeal, much along my questions along Planning Commission. I feel like there's a very strict line between, what is a private matter, the negotiations between a tenant and the possible building owner, and a difference between when that becomes public. And I don't feel like that was met here. Seeing no other questions, I will, council members, Bender's motion is before us. I will take all those in favor, say aye. 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 All those opposed, say no. The ayes have it. And that motion carries. Next on our agenda is item 2 is an appeal submitted by Laura Norcas Crampton on behalf of the East Calhoun Community Organization regarding the Sons of Norway project. And we'll begin with the staff presentation.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, committee members. The appeal before you today is for a project located in the 10th Ward on a block fronting on West Lake Street, Humboldt Avenue South, Holmes Avenue South, and 31st Street West. This is the zoning map here. This project went before the City Planning Commission on January 22nd with several land use applications, one for a rezoning from R4 to R6 for the south parcel on the site, a conditional use permit for a planned unit development, as some committee members are aware, or if they are not, a conditional use permit for a planned unit development allows an applicant to request certain exceptions to the zoning ordinance in exchange for amenities provided in the project. The exceptions that the applicant was requesting in this case were to allow more than one principal structure on the site, to increase the maximum building height on the C3A portion of the site, to reduce required yards, and then to reduce the required front yard setback on the pedestrian-oriented overlay district, which applies to the north part of the site. In addition to that, there was a variance to increase the maximum lot coverage on the south parcel, site plan review, alley vacation for a portion of the existing alley on the site, and then a preliminary and final plat. The City Planning Commission recommended approval on all applications. This is a bird's eye view that shows where the site is located. It occupies a large portion of the block between those fronting streets that I previously mentioned. There is an existing office building on the site, currently occupied by the Sons of Norway, proposed to be demolished. That tenant is intended to occupy the new structure in the proposed commercial space. Some land use context. The project site is located adjacent to the Uptown Activity Center. It fronts along the West Lake Street Commercial Corridor and is guided by the Uptown Small Area Plan. This is a land use map from that plan that calls for mixed use projects along the West Lake Street frontage and medium density housing along the south parcel. The plan also provides guidance as to the type of urban development or the type of development that is desired on those parcels and makes a distinction between neighborhood-oriented, urban-oriented, and transit-oriented at varying scales of intensity and urban quality. The site is guided for urban-oriented in this case. The Uptown Small Area Plan concentrates a lot of guidance on built form and on the desire to see transitions between the denser parts of the neighborhood towards the lower density parts of the neighborhood, single and two family homes. This is an image from that part of the plan. And then an image of the proposed development. I just wanted to provide a little bit of context on how this project has moved through the review and approvals process. The original submission for the project that went to the City Planning Commission Committee of the Whole was for a larger project. It proposed a 6-story structure along that south parcel. Staff and primarily staff expressed concern about the project's not meeting the intent of the small area plan with that amount of bulk, particularly along that south parcel. This is a view of that original proposal, and as a result, the applicant has reduced that south building on the R4 parcel to 5 stories, 59 feet, which is 3 feet above the what would be allowed under the current zoning. This is another view of that updated proposal. This is a site plan showing those different parts of the plan unit development. As I stated previously, there are 2 principal structures as a part of this proposal. One, the north building fronting along Humboldt, and then along West Lake Street, and then the south building fronting along Holmes Avenue and 31st Street West. They are under the guidance of 2 different zoning districts currently, the R4 and the C3A. The applicant is requesting a rezoning to R6 for that south portion of the site. This is a little bit of analysis that attempts to get at the differences between those 2 zoning districts. Under the R4 zoning, there's a maximum density requirement of 1,250 square feet per unit. As a result, the maximum number of units under the current zoning would be 38. The max floor area ratio under the current zoning would be 1.875, and the height would be 4 stories and 56 feet. Under the proposed R6 zoning, R6 does not have a maximum density requirement. The maximum FAR would be 3.6, and the maximum height would be 6 stories or 84 feet. This is a map showing the portion of the alley that is proposed to be vacated. The existing alley would eventually be run to an outlet along Humboldt Avenue South and would be serving only the existing single and 2 family homes on the block. This is a diagram showing the proposed amenities that the applicant is proposing to meet the zoning exceptions. Landscape plan, enhanced exterior lighting. There is a significant amount of parking proposed as a part of the project. Most of that parking is accommodated in an underground parking garage that spans the entirety of the proposed site. And then there is 1 level of at-grade parking in the south building, which is lined on 3 sides with walk-up residential units. That's the site plan of that south building at the grade level. Elevations of the south building. So again, in summary, the land use applications before you today are rezoning from R4 to R6. The Planning Commission recommended approval of that. And then the appeal today concerns the conditional use permit for a planned unit development, variance to increase the maximum lot coverage, site plan review, and then there's the alley vacation and preliminary and final plats. The Planning Commission and staff did impose some conditions of approval on the project at the Planning Commission meeting. One of them was to modify the design of the south building such that it would be divided into 3 primary masses with glass walkways connecting them to add additional transparency through the building from between Holmes and Humboldt Avenue South. I know the applicant has done some thinking about that and may have additional information to provide about how they intend to meet that condition. In addition, the 5th floor of the south building shall be set back a minimum of 6 feet from the building frontage. With regard to the site plan review, staff had imposed a condition of approval that the applicant simplify the design of the south building to reduce the complexity of the material palettes, and then also that the Planning Commission imposed that the public space shall remain open to the public with appropriate management parameters, and that there shall be signs on Lake Street, Holmes, and Humboldt entrances to that area that indicate that the space is open to the public. That concludes my remarks. I can take questions.
Thank you. President Bender.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, Mr. Crandall, I just wanted to thank you so much for all of the time that you've spent on this project. And I just want to say you've gone really above and beyond our expectations for staff, meeting with my constituents on the site and walking around and answering, I know, like probably hundreds of phone calls and emails about this project. And we don't, my colleagues know this, the way that we staff our current planning department, we really don't have a lot of extra time baked in for this kind of community engagement. And so I just wanted to thank you. I had a couple of questions, and I wanted to go back to this question about the zoning of R4 versus R6. And wanted to ask you to explain in more detail the difference between R4, R5, and R6 zoning in terms of the numbers of units that are allowed. Because that's a really big question here in considering the rezoning. The rezoning from R4 to R6 has affects the bulk and scale of the building, but it also affects the number of units that could be built. So even before I took office, I think we used to have density maximums in R5 and R6 that then were removed. But I just wonder if you could talk about that a bit more.
Sure. So there are several differences between the different residence districts in the zoning code. Those include differences in floor area ratio, which is a measure of the bulk of the building. Yard requirements are relatively similar across those zoning classifications. The primary difference when you move from R4 to R5 and R6 is that in R5 and R6, there's no maximum density requirement. So whereas in R4, the maximum is 1,250 square feet per dwelling unit, the R6 does not have a maximum density requirement. So certain things about the project might be similar. R4 has a maximum height of 4 stories and 56 feet. In this case, the applicant is proposing 5 stories. However, the building measures 59 feet to its maximum height. So it's 3 feet over what would be allowed under the R4. The main difference there is just the number of units. The applicant's proposing 145 units. And under the current zoning, it would be a maximum of 38. So.
Could you describe for us what a building would look like if it had 38 units in this area of land?
It's difficult to speculate. It could be somewhat similar in bulk, but with much larger units, although likely it would be a much smaller scale building, like a townhome or several smaller scale buildings compiled on one site.
Thank you. Are there any other questions? Councilmember Gordon.
You showed us a little bit of the small area plan. wonder if you could just tell us how you see this fitting with the small area plan that was approved or not fitting.
Sure. So I kind of went over a little bit of that, but so there's several points at which the small area plan provides guidance on this site. One of them has to do with density, and the site is guided for medium density, which I believe in the small area plan is defined as 20 to 50 dwelling units per acre.
So what would help for me is if we could just enlarge the image and you could show us where the, I have trouble tracking where Lake and Humboldt intersect. And
so this is the site here. And let me zoom in.
And do you think the plan is consistent with the project?
So the proposed project would exceed what the land use map in the small area plan calls for in terms of density. In interpreting the small area plan, you know, the bulk of the content and guidance is concerned around this idea of height and transitions. This illustration kind of demonstrates that. There's several pages of guidance and illustration that make the point that new development should incorporate transitions between the larger scale development at the core of the neighborhood and to the single and two family homes. That was the principal thrust by which staff expressed concern about the original proposal in the project, and requested that the developer make significant alterations to that south portion of the site. Staff feels that there is enough policy guidance in the underlying land use and comprehensive plan to support the amount of density that's proposed while meeting the bulk of the intent of the small area plan with regard to height, density, and building bulk.
Thank you so much.
Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, I guess everyone's interpretation could be completely different. Can you just show me one more time that entire block? Doesn't part of it say medium density and part of it say low density? Or does it all say medium density in the small area plan?
The part of the block that contains existing single and two family homes is guided for the maintenance of a lower density. The portion of the site that is that contains the south building that we've seen is guided for medium density, and then the entirety of the site that's currently zoned C3A is guided for mixed use.
Okay, so I don't have any problem with the part that's on Lake Street. That makes complete sense to me. What doesn't make sense to me is how you can kind of say that a transition from 5 stories to 2 stories is a graceful transition down. I mean, can't you see how that would be different in the eye of the beholder? I see a graceful transition down being from 2 stories to 3 and then maybe 4, but this is like 2 and then 5. And so you can see why people think that that's not a graceful transition down. And then they worked on a small area plan that called for medium density or 36 units, which probably is not enough. Even I would agree with that. But to go from 35 to 100 and what, 50?
145.
145 is a big difference. It's not just 35 to 145. So, I mean, I can see where I have a hard time understanding how you would say that there's a graceful transition down based on the building step down to the lake from 2 stories to 5. Perhaps you could explain to me how the 2 to 5 meets the building step down to the lake from the planning department's point of view.
So we asked the applicant to modify the design to meet the intent of that condition in the small area plan. This is what they came up with, so I might ask that they address that concern. But staff feels that this is supportable based on the existing policy.
Okay, so, and I would happily hear from the proponents or the applicant, because they'll be given more time, how they think 5 to 2 is a graceful step down, and how they think 35 units to 145 units is not a gigantic difference. Just focused on that. Like I said, I have no objection to the part that's in the commercial mixed use portion and its height, density, bulk, mass, nor do I have an issue with the parking. I probably would build less parking. So don't ask me that. But I can see very clearly the confusion the community would have when you show us this picture of the step down to the lake. 2 does not step down, 5 does not step down to 2 in any realistic interpretation.
And just to provide some clarity, we will have a chance for the applicant to speak, and how I'm going to be doing the process next will be the appellant, and much like last time, they'll have time to talk to their points. Then we'll be give a chance to the applicant to speak. Any other further questions? Thank you very much. I'd like to give the applicant an opportunity to speak to the committee. Is there a representative from ECHO here to speak on the appeal? If you could state your name and address, please.
My name is Laura Narkis-Crampton, and I'm here as a representative, as one of many representatives that are here for the ECHO neighborhood in appealing the approval of this proposal. I do have some materials I'd like to just hand out quickly that I think make it a little easier to go through some of this, since there are so many land use applications as part of this proposal.
Sure, if you can hand them to the clerk.
So my name is Laura Narkis-Crampton. I live at 3149 James Avenue South. I've been a 25-year resident of the East Calhoun neighborhood. We bought a fixer-upper a long, long time ago, and we've been active in our community ever since then. And I guess what I'd like to start out by saying is that our appeal on this is based on policy and based on practices. And there has been some frustration in how some of the processes have worked in terms of letters from the neighborhood and from our neighborhood becoming part of the public record, from multiple meetings with the developer, and feeling like the voices of the neighborhood have not been heard. And so I just want to say on the outset that you will hear some of that frustration today, but again, this is not anything against anybody or anything in particular. It's more how the policies work for this property and how it's worked out in practice. So what I'd like to do first off is the main thing that we're, and I should just also say, the reason I am involved in this at all is I am a resident in the neighborhood. Our neighborhood board was very active in initially reaching out to the developer. There was also a parallel campaign done by just neighbors in the neighborhood who were very concerned and had a lot of questions about this proposal. So the two efforts have kind of worked in tandem, but they aren't necessarily coordinated. But we've tried to hit this from a lot of different angles, which is why you see so many people from the neighborhood here today. So I guess starting out with, I think it's very difficult to talk about this whole project without talking about the rezoning as well, because it is an integral part of the project. And when we talk about the medium density and how much density you're allowed to add in this and various things on this project, for instance, on the south side, what we're really talking about is a lot of land use exceptions to make this move forward. When I was trying to understand why the project needed a rezoning, a planned unit development, a conditional use permit, a variance, and a partial alley vacation to make this project go forward, to me that indicates that this is how far out from the intention of the underlying zoning that this project actually is, and how many exceptions to the zoning have to work to make it happen. My understanding also, as far as the R4 zoning for the south side specifically, is that there are certain amounts of increases in density that could happen with a conditional use permit or under the planned unit development. I think it's 20% out of the PUD. But it can't go to the extent that the applicant wants, which is 145. So for that, we also need the R6 rezoning on top of that. And it's particularly that rezoning that is troublesome to the people in my community. So I just want to talk about what the current context is for 31st Street. So, oops, sorry. So this is 31st Street. The site, the building site is to the east of this home right here. This is a single family home. There are duplexes, triplexes. This is all R2B for the overwhelming part of our neighborhood. away from the corridor is all R2B, which is single family duplexes and then some non-conforming or regular triplexes sprinkled through. This is across the street from the proposal. And again, duplex, 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 duplex. So this is not a single family, strictly a single family home, but it is R2B. And so what we've been trying to figure out is, again, what is a logical transition from a 7-story building on a commercial corridor to a residential street like 31st Street. And the uptown plan, the uptown small area plan, which again, if for those, I know we have some new members on the committee and on the city council, and the small area plans, I was fortunate enough to be on the planning commission when they were being codified all over the city. And the intention of the small area plans was not to create a plan separate from the comprehensive plan, but was to figure out how the principles of the comprehensive plan, the land use guidance, could be applied to each unique context. Uptown is a unique context. Chicago and Lake is a unique context. Northeast is a unique context. So what we try to come up with in our plan was something that could specifically deal with the unique context we had here. And so what the guidance for the zoning, and this isn't even from the uptown plan, this is from the actual comprehensive plan, is to encourage development of high density on commercial corridors. 1.10.6 encourage the development of medium density housing on properties adjacent to properties on commercial corridors. So again, as the planner said, for our purposes, medium density was listed as smaller scale, multifamily residential, 20 to 50 units per acre. So the R4 zoning for the south side allows for 35 dwelling units per acre at no more than 4 stories. This does not mean that there couldn't be density added under the R4 zoning. There could be 20% under the PUD. There's some other things with CUPs. It just can't reach the 145 that the applicant is asking for. And that is a concern to the neighborhood. The other thing that we're very concerned about is preserving the stability, as 1.8 says, and diversity of the city's neighborhoods while allowing increased density in order to attract and retain long-term residents and businesses. Now, in the printed extensive appeal statement I forwarded to you, we go into at length about language in the small area plan. And what the small area plan tried to do is to spell out strategies for how we can allow growth and vibrancy on the corridors where they belong, but also allow for the transitions as stated in the comprehensive plan to the predominantly residential neighborhoods. So the idea was to allow for growth on the corridors, but protect the edges of the existing communities so that way you don't have massing, creep, and commercial stuff in places where it doesn't belong on residential streets. Now, this is how we applied it in the uptown plan, but certainly these principles apply all over the city. Any place you have a commercial corridor, you want to make sure that, and that's what the comprehensive plan we interpreted to say as well, is that the concern is that you want to make sure that what happens on a commercial corridor, that there is a buffer between what's happening there and what's happening deeper in the residential neighborhoods. So, and then the other thing that we know is that we have a lot of speculative pressure, real estate pressure in the cities again, and certainly in Uptown we have quite a bit, and that we just feel like this pressures to upzone and award other permits and a PUD to circumvent the letter and the spirit of the comprehensive plan and the Uptown Small Area Plan undermines the ability of long-term renters to stay as rents are driven beyond what they can afford. It also serves to drive up rents in Uptown and throughout the city, making affordable housing situation even worse. And we're seeing that with commercial real estate. We're seeing that with housing. And, you know, the thing that we've been able to enjoy in our neighborhood is that the housing, if you're buying housing in our neighborhood, it's expensive. But renting is still relatively affordable. And we have over 70% renters in our neighborhood now. And these are people that stay for years and years and years because they know they can't afford to buy there, but they want to live there. And we have a very good relationship with all the residents in our community, and we'd like them to be able to stay. The other point here is to promoting growth and encourage overall vitality by directing new commercial and mixed-use development designated corridors and districts. So we feel like the 145 unit, the massing, the density, basically treats 31st Street less like a residential street and more like a de facto corridor. And again, in the picture that we pointed out here, there is you know, we have a boulevard down the middle on 31st Street going towards the lake. On the east side of Hennepin Avenue, where 31st Street cuts across, they've actually throated the curb cuts, so that way it's safer for pedestrians, because they've recognized that the pressure on this street already is impeding the use and enjoyment of the neighborhood, but also access to the lakes and other amenities in the uptown area for regional users. And then finally, we just want to say that ensuring that land use regulations continue to promote development that is compatible with nearby properties. This is part of the comp plan. Neighborhood character and natural features, minimizing pedestrian and vehicular conflict, promoting street life and activity, reinforcing public spaces, and visually enhancement. So we want to make sure that new neighbors are compatible with the old. The zoning for this particular site was very deliberate as a buffer zone between a commercial core and a residential neighborhood. That's why the massive rezoning study that happened after all the smaller area plans were passed, this was the Midtown Greenway land use zoning study, and that was happened in 2010. So that went all the way up and down the Lake Street corridor, all the major intersections, and it was done all at one time to make sure that the regional goals fit this thing. So what I'd like to, we have another person from the neighborhood here, and I guess, and talking about the instability of this and kind of how this can, what we're seeing on the ground versus theories that we're hearing about how, you know, density brings like cheaper housing. We're really not finding that in our neighborhood. So I'd like to invite Christine to just say a few words here dealing specifically with that.
Hi.
Hi, Christine.
My name is Christine Vincent. I live at 3125 Holmes Avenue South, apartment 201. I have been a renter at that address for over 27 years. The effects of the speculative real estate market, the current development, the variances that have been granted on me are this. My building, it's a 28-unit building, has been flipped twice in the last 3 years. My rent has gone up 22% in that time. This rise in rent was without improvements to my unit, with a decrease in the maintenance, the services and amenities to the building, which are making overall the quality of life less livable. The latest figures I have heard for this development, this new development, is that approximately a 375 square foot studio apartment will rent for $1,200 a month. My rent is currently $1,020 a month for a 500 square foot modest one bedroom. Again, and that was with a 22% raise over the last 3 years. I can't afford to live in this new development. I work at the University of Minnesota. I've been employed there for 13 years. I'm in middle management. I'm pretty firmly middle class. I can't afford this on my salary. My employees certainly can't afford it on their salary. Most of my coworkers could not afford this on their salary. I'm a full-time employee by one of the leading employers in the Twin Cities. That's ridiculous. I choose to live in this neighborhood and deliberately chose to move into this neighborhood when I was 20 years old because of all the things that we're hearing about this development, the walkability, the access to transit. I've lived without a car for about a third of the time I've been in the Twin Cities. I rely on that transit. I take it daily. I do own a car. I drive less than 3,500 miles a year. You know, the access to local businesses and their amenities. These are things that are part of my life that I rely upon and that are just the fiber of my day-to-day existence. The reality for me right now, I'm looking at turning 50 years old next year, and I'm either going to need to get a roommate or a second job to be able to afford to live in my neighborhood. Councilperson Bender has mentioned her interest in affordable housing. I appreciate that. There's an NPR news story on January 8th where you were quoted as saying, quote, and of course, supporting housing affordability and stopping displacement in our communities is the #1 priority of the City Council and the Mayor. I appreciate this statement more than you know, but I'm asking you to apply it to my neighborhood because as of right now, the support for this development as it stands is running me out of the neighborhood I've called home my entire adult life. Thank you.
Thank you.
One of the reports that I sent to you, it's a Collier's article, and it states specifically just about national trends and speculative trends in real estate. And they did a special section on Minneapolis-St. Paul because they say that Minneapolis-St. Paul has had record-breaking increases in real estate sales and flipping. And so, of course, every time that happens, every time a property is sold, you know, somebody makes a profit off that, and then eventually it trickles down to the rent. So it does deal with affordability. And what they're saying is that
Oh, excuse me. I also just want to give you a heads up, though, like if you wouldn't mind just starting to wrap up.
I'm sorry.
My goal here is to be very generous with time for the applicants, but it has been a little while.
So what I would just invite you to do is just to please look at the report, because what it talks about specifically is that the instability that these upzonings and continued revisiting of the zonings and spot rezoning, that just sort of, and overreaching projects like this in terms of density and intensity, really feed the sort of speculative market. And we all lived through the last sort of real estate boom and bust. What they're saying, what the Collier's article says, is that Minneapolis, St. Paul, that our rents are actually too low, that our housing costs are too low relative to our cost of living. And this is one example just here real quickly. So they rate Minneapolis, St. Paul, they say our median income is $74,500. Our housing costs are here. Comparable, Denver, $398 for the same income. A little bit above that, Seattle. So based on these kinds of numbers, we're on the map for people who, especially from out of state and even international investors, that say, boy, there's a lot of room here to drive these prices up, and it will still be reasonable by national standards. So this, in turn, this again is exactly what we're concerned about. The variances, the CUPs, the massing that shadows our neighbors. And the other final quantifiable thing I'd like to talk about, the density to this site, is some of the specific public health and public safety things that have come up. The city has done its own pedestrian crash study. Hennepin Lake is number 4 as far as safety as far as the highest amount of pedestrian crashes with the current density and the current car traffic we have now. We also have an anti-idling ordinance, and there's been problems with that in this area already. And we also have Hennepin and Lake that was cited by the EPA at one point in terms of being one of the most polluted intersection in the region. And the way that was handled is that we ended up with one-way pairs, so there'd be less idling. Well, when you have this development emptying out onto a side street that empties out into a T intersection at Holmes and Lake Street, for instance, and trying to figure out a way to get around to go points north down Hennepin, further down Lagoon, whatever, and the traffic study did try to address that, even though they did it in October rather than our busiest season. You can anticipate there'd be a lot more R-lane traffic, a lot more pedestrian car conflicts, and so that's kind of where that's one of the many other concerns that we have here. So I'd like to close with just a statement of somebody who's been looking at these studies a little bit more. And again, the goal of this is not to say we like density, we don't like density, is try to quantify what should go where, what the existing context is, and to try to quantify the impact of that rather than just saying we want it or we don't want it. So that's what the numbers that we've tried to bring here today. So I have Carol Dodds just going to say a few words, and that'll be at the close of our testimony.
Well, I think if we could have that during the other part of the testimony,
Okay.
We'll have 2 minutes. If your testimony is under 2 minutes,
All right,
more than
thank you
happy
very
to do
much.
that.
And is there any questions for me while I'm here?
No, thank you very much for your testimony.
Thank you.
I'd like to give time for the applicant to talk a little bit more about the project. I know we had a couple questions from council members. If you wouldn't mind being brief.
Chair Schrader, members of the council, my name is Tony Barranco, 4716 Colfax Avenue South in the Lyndhurst neighborhood, and I'll do my best to keep my comments brief and try to address some of the comments from both Council President Bender as well as Councilwoman Goodman. First of all, I wanted to thank and acknowledge the Sons of Norway folks for entrusting Ryan with really revitalizing their business on the site. I don't think I came to appreciate the investment that they've made in Uptown and their business, as well as the impact that they've had on the community. And you'll hear from Ivan Heiberg in a little bit, the CEO of Sons of Norway as well. Also wanted to echo Council President Bender's comments related to Peter Crandall. He has gone above and beyond to support us in this process. And I want to acknowledge that this is a large site. It's a site that's been in its similar form for the last 5 decades, and it's in a fully developed area. And for that reason, we've been very proactive in outreach to the community engaging in dozens of meetings with the Echo neighborhood, with Wedge, with East Isles, with the Uptown Association. On our own, we've done 2 different open houses for broad feedback, and we've taken dozens of emails, phone calls about it. I want to also recognize Monica Smith from the Echo neighborhood, and Susie. I don't know if Susie is here as well. They've done tons of additional emails and other things to support getting the word out. We also, whether we've liked it or not, have a lot of questions, and we've also received tons of support. I've never had a project that has had 2 websites created to support it without our inducement, but that's been what's happened. And we've had a lot of friends come join us for these conversations. Also, am thankful to the Wedge neighborhood for providing a letter of support and the unanimous support from the Plan Commission at our hearing on January 22nd. I'm going to briefly walk through a couple parts of the site, including some of the things that have changed since the last meeting. I'll try to be brief. Peter, where do it just advance here? I won't share the current site as Peter had gone through that, but a couple of the things that some of the Plan Commissioner or the Plan Commissioners has discussed and council members brought up today. What does density look like? This is a massing diagram that may be in an earlier packet that shows what varying densities look like on the sites. I'll take a minute to point out 2 projects that are one completed, one nearly completed, that are adjacent to the site across homes to the east. You can't see my finger here, but the mouse there shows in the upper right-hand corner a project that's across homes. That project is 71 apartments, and it fits on a very small portion of the site. That is 253 units per acre in density. Just south of that, there's another project that's 60 units of apartments that fits on, it's about 190 units per acre in density. What we're proposing across the street, if you take a look at these 3 massing points just to the west side of homes, are 3 individual blocks. Each of those has densities around 135 units. So showing in context with how that looks in a physical form, that'll give you a good sense of that. From an architectural perspective, we've always tried to divide it into a couple of different points, a north building and a south building. And in each of those, we've tried to create individual and unique masses to show a smaller scale and to also give some context similar to what you see in Uptown with a lot of different design masses. And this is our interpretation of that. In order to address one of the key concerns for the neighbors, as Peter had mentioned, our original proposal did include a 6th story on the south building along Holmes. At staff's requirement, we've removed that story to bring that height of that building down to make the transition over. I'd also like to point out that that building on Holmes is a residential building its entirety. We were given 2 different comments from Plan Commissioners. One included creating a better visual corridor of a pass-through within the buildings. I've got a graphic of that, which I'll show next. You can take a look at kind of the middle right of this. We've made a quick modification of this plan to show what that recommendation from Commissioner Kronzer will look like with a pass-through in between that 30-foot setback of relief on the site. The other condition, which you can also see in the attached image, is the visual of the 6-foot setback. That was a requirement, again, a requirement provided in the January 22nd Plan Commission meeting. The changes that were brought up did cause a small reduction in units. Right now, we've got about 317 units of apartments within the broad project from 319, which you've seen in the package. We've also continued to redevelop or continue to work through the exterior massing of the site, as one of the conditions is that we simplify the exterior design, and we'll continue to work with staff on that requirement as we go through. So clearly the section of the project that has gotten the most feedback has been our south building. Go back a few pages here. The building is reflected on the middle left-hand side of this. And as we've discussed, that site is currently zoned R4. We acknowledge that. We are proposing an R6 zoning, but the building in terms of size is very similar to what could be approved in an R4 from an overall massing perspective. The R4 allows for a 4-story building that is 56 feet in height and 101,400 square feet. Our proposal is for a 59-foot high building with a setback. The corner features along Holmes and 31st are 47 feet or just shortly above that. And our building size is about 138,000 square feet. So what we're proposing is a difference of about 3 feet in height and about 37,000 square feet in aggregate size of building. We've got a couple images that show what that looks like in a physical context. This gray box, if an R4 building would be built with to its maximum size, is what could be built within this area. Our project is superimposed underneath this. So again, the gray box refers to what could be built in the current R4 zoning. What's underneath that is what we are proposing in our project. This is a little bit of a better shot because it does show the 3 feet, which is represented in that brown section above. That shows the difference in height there. And one of the things I'd like to take a quick minute to address, Councilmember Goodman's comments about transition to the neighborhood. I do want to make a couple of notes on that. First of all, if you take a look to the right of this image, there is the Della project. That building tops out at 81 feet. Our building at 59 feet, as you move to the west, is a reduction from the 81 feet. And then the height of the single family homes, I don't think if we've measured those, but I'm guessing they're probably in the high 20s to 30 feet. And so if you look at the transition moving from east to west, you're going from 81 feet to 59 to 25 to 30 feet. And we feel as though that is meeting some of the intent of the transition in height. The other thing I think that's important to note is there's a transition is not only in height, but transition also is in use type. We understand that the transition coming from the east, which is much more commercial in nature, you've got Lucia's and then you've got the proposed retail that would be at the base of Della Point. Our project is all residential. So as you're going along 31st, if you were to look at our building, each one of those doors is someone's home. So you'd knock on that door and you'd be greeted by your neighbor or a pet or someone else, creating the transition again from a commercial, more dense node to a fully residential node of shorter height.
Thank you. If you could start to wrap up, I know we had questions from council members.
Great. Last thing I'll just talk about is project benefits and who are served by these. You know, the site has been an undeveloped site. There's significant contamination on the site. The site also has no active stormwater management plan. This site would remedy those, and that benefits the health and safety of our community. The development will also serve our community by increasing tax base and increasing fee base, which benefits our parks, our schools, and the fiscal health of our community. We're also creating an urban backyard, or 15,000 square feet of green space is really going to be additive to the community building within the neighborhood. And we think that that element will build off of what Stu and the group has done near Mosaic in creating more active urban space, again, for vibrancy and for the community. We also firmly believe that creating new housing options will help folks like Christine with affordability, because if we don't address in building more supply in the city, we are going to continue to see rents increase because there aren't going to be enough options for renters. With that, I'll conclude my comments and open it up for any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions from council members? Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
With that, I'm going to open the public hearing portion of this. Again, please limit the testimony to new comments only. We've received a lot of public feedback on both sides of this project. There's no need to repeat information, and comments again will be limited to 2 minutes per person, which will be tracked by the timer near the clerk. And once at the podium, please state your name and address for the record. Is there anyone wishing to speak on this project? Jump on up.
Hello, thank you for letting us come today. My name is Carol Dines. I live at 3245 Irving Avenue South. And I'm going to speak quickly because I was supposed to be one of the appellants. And I'm here today because I believe this building is really bad urban planning for our neighborhood at the 31st Street corridor. If the goal in the city is to build walkable, bikeable spaces, the Sons of Norway density is not responsible planning. in an area that is already highly congested 5 months of the year. The traffic study paid for by Ryan was done in late October and did not take into consideration the huge seasonal uptick in traffic during the summer. From May through September, Vannelli and Uptown form a regional destination. We host in this neighborhood the Aquatennial, Bastille Day Jazz Festival, Greek Festival, Food Truck Festival, along with fundraising runs almost every weekend. Anyone who comes to Uptown during the warmer months knows that people from all over the Twin Cities flock to the lakes and escape the heat. The proposed Sons of Norway will bring a 25% increase in population to one neighborhood, an estimated 400 to 500 new residents. The parking they are providing is not adequate. 323 parking spaces for 325 units is misleading when you consider 93 of the apartments are 2-bedroom and the parking spaces for residents must be paid for, and they will be shared with 40 office workers, retail, restaurant staff, and patrons, along with visitors to the 400 to 500 residents. A building with this density and an estimated 2,176 average daily trips per day is undoubtedly going to contribute to congestion.
Thank you.
Let me wrap up, please.
Quickly.
If the city is serious about affordable housing, serious about a plan to mix affordable housing into all neighborhoods, serious too about creating friendly, bikeable neighborhoods, then this kind of density should not be concentrated in one neighborhood.
Thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to speak? Okay. Well.
Oh, I'm sorry. Can I go first? Is that okay?
Sure.
All right.
Sorry.
Well, thank you for working that out.
Thank you for having me. My name is Andy Finn. I live at 2327 Meeting Place in Wayzata. My family has been owners of property and owners of Minneapolis Ragstock for over 33 years in this neighborhood. We've seen a lot of change in Uptown. I'm going to keep it brief. I really support this project. I think it's a great added benefit to the neighborhood. I think it'll be great for my tenants in the building. I think it'll be great for my company. And that's all I have to say. So thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. My name is Erica Brask. I live at 3113 Humboldt Avenue South. I'm less than one block from the site. In fact, my house is on many of those renderings. And this is my oldest daughter, Morgan, who rides her bike in our neighborhood and walks to Lunds and Byerly's with us on a regular basis. We regularly have to dodge cars just crossing 31st Street because there aren't lighted crosswalks. There aren't painted lines on the road. It is already a concern. And I stand here today despite being told how hopeless it would be, how my voice wasn't going to matter. And nevertheless, I will persist, and I will stand here on behalf of myself, my family, my fellow neighbors who couldn't make it today, to tell you that I think this is so far out of proportion. We just bought this home on Humboldt in 2016, and the way that cars already speed up our street has me on edge with my 6-year-old daughter learning to ride her bike. So I hope that you truly can look beyond parcels and zones and lots and masses and density and buildings and see the buffer that we really need between the commercial corridor and legitimate, real families. And that is why I'm here today, in support of ECHO's appeal. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else wishing to speak? Being that I've seen this kind of bunch up, if you want to speak, maybe move to the middle. Sir, go ahead.
Thank you. Chair, Vice Chair, committee members. My name is Peter Mason. I live in the East Isles neighborhood. I'm a resident. I think renter and homeowner is a misnomer, should not be used. I'm a resident of East Isles at 2513 Irving. Minneapolis has critical housing needs. There's a vacancy rate of about 3% or lower. And if projects like this are not built, it's going to get worse. Rents are going to get higher. This is the exact type of thing that needs to be built. And that's because of exclusionary zoning that Minneapolis has had for a long time. The only issue here is the south building. This north building is 172 units. That's out of question here. It's 145 units in the south building, whereas you can see from the picture what they could build as of right. It's not a height issue. As Councilmember Goodman noted, what's the graceful 5-2? This is the exact same graceful thing that is under the small area plan with just an extra 3 feet of height. What it is the number of units. We need more neighbors. I was very privileged to grow up in Minneapolis, in the Sidna neighborhood. We should have more people that have that opportunity like me. And how can you do that? You build more housing. It's a mere supply and demand issue. You build more housing, other housing become more affordable. So this particular project may not be affordable for some people, but that's not the issue. It's that overall other units will be, that people will move out of units because the amenities this may provide, and other units would then be vacated that don't have the same amenities that would be affordable. This is the exact type of project. And just to address the traffic or parking issues, well, first of all, those are competing. If you build more parking spaces, you're going to have more traffic. Parking spaces brings cars, no parking spaces doesn't. But even with that, there's a solution on each of these with the city right now, critical area parking. There's a project that was down right on the lake. They have critical area parking around that. So if there's a problem with parking for residents in the area, want to store their private vehicles for free in the public right away, they can do so for $25 a year, as opposed to free now with critical parking permits. And they're allowed ones for visitors as well. Separately, there's ways if there's problems with traffic and how it is, how fast, there's bulb outs, there's crosswalks, there's tables that they can build that the city has in its things to do under the public works, that can be addressed. And so it's very easy, and that should not be the responsibility of this developer, but the responsibility of Minneapolis. Thank you.
Thank you. I also want to let folks know that everyone is going to be heard that's been able to sign up. So I don't want there to be a line in the middle or feel like people have to stand. Thank you, sir. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, council members, for this opportunity to speak on this important matter. My name is Nathan Campo. I've lived in East Calhoun for 9 years, and I'm a civil engineer. I live on Humboldt, which forms the western border of the project, several blocks south of the project. I'm active in the neighborhood, having served on the ECHO board and led many neighborhood improvement initiatives, including bringing more than a dozen rain gardens to our neighborhood. I've worked closely with my neighbors and friends, many of whom are here, and while we all have passion for our wonderful, friendly, and livable neighborhood, on this proposed redevelopment, I respectfully disagree with some of my neighbors and friends. I support the Sons of Neighborhood redevelopment because it addresses many of our cities and neighborhoods' goals and priorities. First, we have a citywide and neighborhood housing shortage, and this project is just one of many needed projects that begins to address that shortage. Second, our neighborhood and city have made a strong commitment to improving the environment, and this project builds housing on a high-frequency transit line in a walkable neighborhood, which places our housing and our city's people in a place well-suited to reducing driving trips and supporting our climate action goals. Third, our neighborhood's businesses need additional local residents to support them. Our local businesses do best when they're supported primarily by neighborhood residents. My wife and I love eating at Lake and Irving, not just because the staff and food are so wonderful, but primarily because it has become a community gathering space where we can see all of our neighbors. The more residents our neighborhood has, the more formal and informal community gathering spaces we'll have. Fourth, and finally, I'm sick of looking at this parking lot. When I moved to ECHO 9 years ago, I was shocked that this intersection of Lake and Humboldt had surface parking lots at 3 of the 4 corners. It's only nominally better today. This site could be so much better and provide more to our neighborhood's existing and future residents with so much more value than the parking lot ever has. I do have some concerns. I originally had some concerns about the height, particularly along 31st Street. Given how wide 31st is and the fact that the project has come down in scale, I support the project as it is. And like most of my neighbors, I have concerns that the project does not include affordable housing. I understand that the city has limits with what they can require regarding affordable housing, and I would encourage the council to consider changes in the future to build new tools to allow affordable housing to permeate all neighborhoods throughout the city.
Thank you. Thank you. Hello.
Hi, my name is Heather Wolfsberg, and I'm a homeowner in East Calhoun, 3,300 homes just down the street. And density is the word of the day. And I welcome this development, but at the buffer zone, that south parcel everybody's been talking about, I really feel that R4 should be held. And the density, I feel like there is a tipping point And I think Uptown, I've heard some articles saying that Uptown was like one of the densest parts of the city. It's vibrant, it's beautiful. I love the city. I love being a part of it. I'm raising my family here. But I feel there is a tipping point. I walked my dog this morning and there were 6 developments that either are in process or done in Echo and, adjacent to it. So I feel like you guys are encouraging density. It's happening. I think keeping the density level in that south parcel is really important. Somebody wants to put down roots and have family. They're not going to do it in a micro apartment that's 350 square feet. They're going to move out. I think the people who have to support the rents in these units are going to have to drive to their jobs out in the suburbs. Cars are a reality. I hate to say it. My biggest fear, like this woman's, is my kids getting hit by a car in Uptown. There is mounting frustrations. It's crazy. I have to walk around and I know that's a part of, we work with Public Works, but with this 145 units are going to come cars, or else people who are visiting the people with their cars. With the snow and sides of streets stripped of parking, cars. So I feel like it's an issue. I feel like it's a dirty word, but that's our reality. So please, the people who are directly affected, really directly affected, living in this neighborhood for decades, can you please consider our feelings and our quality of life? Just vote for the R4. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Dane Stimmart, and I own a small 700 square foot condo on 3033 East Calhoun Parkway amongst 9 mixed owner rental units. I have now lived in Minneapolis for 14 years, 5 years in Dickeytown, 1 downtown, 2 in renting in the Granada, which is right across basically the street from the Sons of Norway. And I'm currently in the Echo neighborhood. I am here today to voice my concern as an individual and Echo community member and as a Minneapolis resident. I love this city, our neighborhoods, and the people who live here and care for it. I have been fortunate enough to have a job that takes me all over the world, and I found that this place has the best balance of community, responsible development, parks, and wildlife. Unfortunately now, this incredible place has caught the eyes of profit-driven development firms, and I am terribly concerned how the Sons of Norway development proposal has been handled. Our Uptown Small Area Plan, which has won an award for excellence for applying the city's comprehensive plan to Uptown in a thoughtful, innovative way by the Pro-Density American Planning Association, is being trashed. Our Echo board and community letters opposing this large-scale project have been hidden and diluted among suspicious citywide emails without addresses. Local developers who had bid to stay within the zoning were denied, and our Planning Commission has turned a cold shoulder to the people who physically live here and know it makes our community healthy now and for the long term. I have no doubt that if this Sons of Norway project is approved, that your decision will signal to these global profit-driven development firms looking to laugh past our thoughtfully created community zoning and density balance, and our community and our city are for sale to the highest bidder. There are responsible project proposals that can promote density and still respect the current zoning for this site. The city does not owe this developer or anyone so many exceptions to zoning, comprehensive plan, and Uptown Small Area Plan that they can drop such a massive cash vacuum in the middle of our neighborhood. So I'm asking you today as members of the Zoning and Planning Committee to please uphold the zoning and the current comprehensive plan and Uptown Small Area Plan by deliberating the Echo appeal. Let's turn this lot into a responsible building size, density, and cost effectiveness to build this great community that has drawn the world's attention. We, Minnesotans, the bold North, are better than this.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Please hold the clapping. Sir, you ready to speak?
Hi, my name is Keith Shulquist, and I live at 3141 Hennepin Avenue, which is in the heart of Uptown. I've lived there for 41 years. I've seen a lot of development. I'm an architect. I'm pro-development. However, I'm pro-responsible development. And it appears to me that what's happening here is just making favoritism to the developer and no basis for it. We've already talked a lot about the transition of R4, and I've got an example. Next to my house, they're doing a project. Lander Development is doing one. It's R4. They combine, they're setting back from the street at 2 stories, and then they go to 4 at the alley. And they are responsible developers, and they're not maxing out the site, which is most of what they want to do on this project, is max it out for the most dollars and the most people. And I just hope that the Planning Commission will stick to their guns and make it R4. That's the way it was planned to be, and that's the way it should be. Thank you.
Thank you. Please hold the clapping. Next up.
Hello, thank you for letting me speak. I'm on that list, so you can cross me off. My name is Linda Hoon. I have owned a duplex which I live in at 26th and DuPont in Minneapolis, which I've owned since 1977. I previously lived 2 blocks from the proposed development, and then when I lived by myself, I moved 5 blocks away. So I have about 50 years in this neighborhood. So I currently live in the Wedge. What I want to say is I want to ask people to really look at this supply side argument that if you create more housing, the cost of each apartment will go down. I think this does not take into consideration the fact that the city of Minneapolis seems to want to increase our population. And so maybe the rents will go down for a while, but you increase the population and you're back where you started. So I think this is just another Ponzi scheme to ignore the feelings of the people who already live here, because you've got us here and we're not going to move, and to bring in more people to raise property values, raise taxes, then everybody's property values, everybody's property taxes go up, then rents go up. I have to raise my rents to my tenants when my taxes go up. Okay, so I think that we've got to stop killing the goose that laid the golden egg. You know, those of us who are here should have priority over developers who aren't going to live in the neighborhood, who probably live somewhere else. You know, they have their own lakeshore, their own duck pond, whatever. But we live here and we're committed to our neighborhood and to our properties, to improving our properties. We need to have more families in this neighborhood, not more single apartments. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir.
Hello, my name is Joe Huber. I resided in the Wedge at 2008 Bryan Avenue South. I'm here today to support the Sons of Norway project for several reasons. One of the things that I'd like to acknowledge is that the Sons of Norway is the organization that initiated this development. They are a local organization that's been in Uptown for a long time, support good paying jobs in the community, and have partnered with a local developer, Ryan, to build a community-driven project. They've held numerous sessions with Echo. They also came to Lena, to which I am a part of, responded to our questions, thoughtfully incorporated feedback, and they've also included a public-private partnership element in the park that they want to build as part of this project. A lot of people have discussed the traffic that this development would cause, and yes, there's traffic in Uptown. We live in a city, and that's the price we pay to live in a nice, vibrant area. The apartment building that I live in actually has 2 spots for the 10 units. A lot of us have given up our cars, we take the bus, we bike, and we're just fine for it. And, you know, traffic is terrible, but if this building isn't built, where is it going to go? Because the market is asking for more homes. Is it going to go on a wetland out in Orono? Is it going to go in St. Louis Park? When we build buildings further out in the metropolitan area, people drive more. And when we build buildings in dense, walkable neighborhoods, people are more inclined to walk. And if you look at the amenities in Uptown, there's plenty of clothing stores, there's a grocery store across the street, there's a pharmacy, and plenty of restaurants to walk and bike to. The other thing that I would like to say is that Lena actually supported this project, and one of the things they outlined is that currently 100% of the stormwater isn't managed on site, whereas this project is committed to an environmentally responsible management of the stormwater on site. And I think that's important to consider.
Thank you very much.
My name is Eric Hendrickson. I live at 3045 Humboldt, immediately adjacent to the development. So 2 clarifications of fact and then just sort of a general statement. So the 2 clarifications of fact are directed to Tony Barranco, the applicant. So first of all, he made a comparison about the buildings across the street with his development. And he sort of said, look, it's the same density. There's no difference here. Those buildings are in the activity center. They're designed to be high density. His building is in the buffer zone. It's designed not to be high density. He's comparing apples with oranges, and the comparison doesn't exist at all. Second of all, he made an incredibly bad analogy. He was trying to say, look, we're transitioning from commercial to sort of dense residential to less dense residential. We're going from east to west. And his example was Lucia's restaurant. Okay, Lucia's restaurant closed, okay, because they built a development on that corner and took their parking all away. So I'm sorry, the developer is so out of touch that he doesn't realize that the last development that went in our neighborhood killed one of the city's most beloved restaurants. Then they're just out of touch with where the community is. And that's my last point. I think if you're on the street, if you are in the Echo neighborhood, we've had people from Echo come up here and voice their approval of this thing. Perfectly fine. But if you're on the street, you go to these meetings, you talk to your neighbors, 80, 90% of the people in Echo are against this project. And I want to make sure that the city council really understands that if they vote for the approval of this, they are shoving this thing down. All of the neighbors of Echo really are.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Peter Stark. My wife Heidi and I live at 1446 West 34th Street. And it angers me beyond words that I'm here this morning. Two quick things. First of all, if I lived in the Wedge or I lived on Colfax, this project would be great. I wouldn't have 350 cars wandering through my neighborhood. I'll get 350 of my friends. We'll just circle your block for a while, see how that works. Okay?
The clerk could stop the clock for a second. I do want to say this, we want to hear the issues. And no,
I'll be polite.
But it's not even you. I just also want to say that we're going to have people that are very passionate in this committee going forward, and I'm not going to tolerate anything that goes a little more personal. You were very close, but didn't get there. I don't want you to take it too personally.
I won't go there.
But I do want to let that be known.
No, but I want to make sure you understand that this is personal for us in Echo.
Oh, absolutely.
As the gentleman before me mentioned, this is our neighborhood. And there's no objection to anyone in Echo to development. That's not our issue. What our issue is the constant rezoning of this, the destruction of this small area plan that has been approved and is being violated. Now, that's been said again and again and again and again. We're not against development. We're not anti-diversity. We're not anti-development. We're not even anti-bike. We're anti-145 high-density units on that spot. So that's my 2 cents.
Thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It's barely morning. My name is Sarah Wall. I live at 33rd and Holmes, and I've lived there for over 40 years. I've been trying to go through and eliminate the issues that have already been mentioned by people. So I just want to make a comment about some things that have not been commented upon. It has been, and I wanted to point out that there are many of the long-term residents of the Echo neighborhood who, before it was trendy, chose to live and or raise their families in the city, the denser urban areas, rather than in the more spacious suburbs. And my comment is with respect to the parking congestion, which has been horrible for a number of years, and it's great. I would like to comment, since it has been really disappointing, the responses have been given to a resolution of that issue is that people shouldn't have cars, they shouldn't drive, they should ride bicycles. My point on that is that not everyone is able physically or due to medical conditions to ride a bicycle. That's the point. In short, people are going to need to have a car. You need to take your children to child care, school activities, medical appointments. You may have elderly parents that you need to transport to medical appointments, and they aren't always in destinations that are on bus lines or other public transportation. So my point is that parking is essential, and it is a huge issue, and that there is not sufficient parking being made available either in this development or past development, which is what has caused the parking problem and issues. Other points that I was going to make have been touched on. I would like to say that the basis for the appeal is that of the Planning Commission's decision is that it is arbitrary and capricious. Number one, their findings are based on general conclusory statements not supported by the evidence. Number two, the commission did not receive or consider and or ignored the testimony and written objections of the residents. Number three, commission did not consider the cumulative impact of the multiple large developments that are currently being built as well as those that have been built in the fairly recent future. So
thank you.
My point is enough is enough.
Thank you. And you can just give that to the clerk.
Okay. So my name is Jack Zipes, and I live on 3245 Irving Avenue South, and I'm a happily retired faculty member of the university, and I taught German and critical theory. And I just want to make some comments about what's been going on here because it really angers me as well as my compatriot over there. And I want to talk with terms that are much more honest and truthful. So I want to talk about, very briefly, the type of what we might call gentrification of Uptown, which is really horrible. And I come, by the way, I grew up, as you can tell from my accent, in New York, and my father fought with all sorts of people like Trump, and I grew up in a real estate family where I had to work every summer in some aspect of real estate, so that by the time I was 22, I was fed up by what I call speculation. Okay, this notion that there are developers out there who are not speculators, speculating with our lives is ridiculous. There's no such thing as developers. There's such a thing as people who want to make profit by buying buildings or building buildings and not taking into the consideration of people in a community. Gentrification is alienation. Communities are being destroyed. When I grew up on the Upper West Side and Giuliani became mayor of New York, he destroyed a whole section of New York City. And it's actually going on throughout the world. So I just want to close by saying that the type of gentrification, and I'll make it very quick, I've got 3 sentences.
I would cut that to 1.
Well,
Seriously.
There's semicolons there too.
Don't get cute. I would just say, go finish your statement, please.
I think you should just hear me out, please.
I appreciate your written statement. Everyone else has gotten 2 minutes. There's more people waiting to speak.
I know that. I know that. Okay. Gentrification means higher rents, higher prices, no diversity, no affordable living, congestion, and more destruction of community. And that would be a shame if you look at the wonderful people here in our community who are dead set against this development.
Thank you. Please hold the clapping.
Hi, I'm Sandy Thomas. I live at 3100 Homes. So basically my house is right there and I'm looking at the property. I've lived there. I've owned that house for 30 years. We bought it as an investment. I was in my 20s. We were only going to live there, fix it up, move on, because that's what we did. I'm in real estate. We love living there. Our daughter is now 28 years old, was born there. So I am as sad as what my man just said, and I agree with all that. That's not reality. We know that this site, I knew when I was 25 years old that this was going to get developed. This is not what I thought it would be. I did not think it would be a high rise. The Graves building, we dealt with it. It's beautiful. I don't have a problem with it. It's reality. This is different. This is coming in. There's too many people. The cars, with her getting hit by a car, it's always been busy. My daughter, when she was young, I had to worry about that. It's 100 times worse. So to take it and not be realistic and say, we're going to make it bigger is a problem. And we all, as much as what he just said, I agree with. I know because of the business I'm in, it's happening. We can't cry and scream. I'd love it. Lay in the road. I look at it all day. My husband's so depressed about this. He won't come because he knows he doesn't even think he has a voice to say anything. He doesn't like it. I'd like to just sell my house. I've lived here forever. I can't because I got to wait till this beast goes in, and I'm stuck now. And I don't want to move. But this is the problem in a nutshell: is it's too many people, it's too many cars, and it's not going to make rent prices go down. My house is a duplex. I get the highest rent of anyone in that neighborhood. So believe me, I get how it works. It's not going to make her rent cheaper. Her guy's going to say that owns it, I'm jacking this up. They're getting that. I'm getting that. That's the reality. I don't have, so the whole thing is sad. We're asking, don't take it and make it bigger. That's it. Then we have to deal with. Yeah, we'd like the whole thing to be a part. Well, it's not going to happen.
All right, thank you. All right, is there anyone else interested in speaking? And just to get an interest of time, could I get if you're interested in speaking, could you raise your hand and have it yet? Yep. Okay, thank you. Thank you, sir.
City Council members, my name is Ivan Heiberg. I am the CEO for Sons of Norway, located on 1455 West Lake Street. I have personally worked for Sons of Norway in this location for nearly 16 years. And on behalf of the entire organization, we want to thank you for taking time to review these project plans. Sons of Norway is a 123-year-old company, organization that has been engaged employer, business owner in Uptown for over 86 years. Sons of Norway is a community of people dedicated to their families, other members, and making a difference in the world around them. Together, we celebrate the heritage and culture of Norway, and this site not only serves as the base of our business for financial products and services, but also other cultural functions, including the office of the Royal Norwegian Consulate. While we have enjoyed our current home and the role that it's played in the community for nearly 6 decades, the physical space that we occupy has not kept pace with the growth and future of our company. We see that our office is obsolete in certain areas in need of repair, and certainly not in the highest and best use form. Despite our aging physical space, our commitment to Minneapolis and the Uptown neighborhood is as strong as ever. Over the past few years, we saw the city developing around us, and we felt it was the right time to engage a partner who could help us shape Sons of Norway's presence in Uptown for the next generation. We want to reinvent ourselves and at the same time be stewards of the Minneapolis community that we call home. In looking for a partner, we were drawn to Ryan Companies for the like-minded values and shared commitment to Minneapolis. They're a perfect fit for us, and we're really excited about these plans and how that's going to help transform Sons of Norway in Uptown.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Molly Palmer, and I live at 3440 Colfax South, and I'm here in support of my neighbors in Echo, and I ask you to please support their appeal. While I do not live immediately next to this development, Lund's is my grocery store, Wells Fargo is my bank, I'm at Kinko's all the time, and the traffic that has infiltrated the neighborhood since the big development building boom in the last 5 or so years has just been incredible. It's nearly impossible to just pull out of the Lund's parking lot to go back to my home. I worry about the families, the children, the pedestrians. We want all these new people to come into the community, and we welcome them. The density is an issue that needs to be addressed, but it needs to be addressed smartly and sensitively. These are families and children, and like I said, it's not directly my home, but it's my home, it's my neighborhood, and these are real lives and real people, and we're not asking to not build the building. It needs to happen. I support the Sons of Norway, and Ryan, I work in the construction industry, but it's the scale and the buffer and the traffic that is of major concern to me and my neighbors in the Carreg neighborhood and others in the area and in Minneapolis as a whole. We want to keep the livability standard as wonderful as it is, and by increasing the density in that specific location right there as you come into Uptown from the west, it's I feel like it's just going to create an even hairier issue. So on behalf of my neighbors and the Echo community and people who really care about the standard of living in Minneapolis, please keep the zone 4. Thanks.
My name is Mary Sabatke. I live at 3420 Irving Avenue South, and we've lived there in August, will be 35 years. Everybody's talked about all the issues, and I won't bring them all up again except for 2 things. One of them is that the Graves building, I want to make clarification, has 9 units in it, 9, as opposed to 145. So when we're talking about mass, it's not apples and apples, it's apples and oranges. The other thing is, which hasn't been brought up today, but was certainly brought up in the planning particularly, was the supposed amenities that are being provided by this, the major complex that is going in, and in the fjord, which we kind of all laugh about in our neighborhood. But the point of it is talking about a green space in the middle, which from our understanding is going to be AstroTurf, not green space. And the other is that in the winter we'll have a little skating rink there. We have a beautiful skating rink down on Lake of the Isles, which we've just, as a neighborhood association, contributed money into the repair for the Waring House. I think that is really not an amenity. And the point of putting signs up saying this is public can go here, let me question that if there gets time or somebody's loud out there, and if you're paying $2,500 a month for your rent, you're not going to want the public in this little tiny space, either skating or sitting on a bench. So I would just question what the amenities are really going to provide for the neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else interested in speaking?
Hello, my name is Andrea Keepy. I'm from the South Side. My address is 3220 Fifth Avenue South. Although I don't live precisely in this neighborhood, like many Minneapolitans, I socialize there, and I just want to speak in favor of the Sons of Norway project. I personally don't believe that increasing supply alone will solve the affordable housing problem, but it's definitely an important tool. And I simply do not understand what is controversial about building a 5-story building full of apartments. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with people who live in apartments. This is one of the most walkable neighborhoods in the state. I would love to see it have more transit amenities, but there's currently, at least as far as I know, at least 6 bus lines that would provide easy access for people to live car light or car free and access jobs in downtown. Or walk or bike very easily to downtown. There's nothing wrong with this proposal, and I encourage you to support it and support other projects like it. If people would like to see more affordable housing in in Minneapolis, I agree with that completely, and I think that we should devote more money to that so that this is higher income targeted buildings like this are not our only option, but I don't think that we should penalize projects like this. So thank you for your time and attention.
Thank you. Is there anyone else interested in speaking? Come on up.
Hi, my name is Kathy Scoggin. I live at 3229 Irving Avenue South. And I want you to think about a couple of things. One is we've talked all about density. You know all about that. We've talked about cars. We also need to think about the more bicycles that will be there. Every day almost, I try to cross on Irving Avenue, across the lagoon, and then go across the next street. There is not even a stop sign there. It is incredibly dangerous. Cars park and you can't see to even cross the street. And so if we talk about more density, more bikes, more people walking, people always try to cross the street where they're not supposed to. And we need to keep that in mind. In addition to the fact that I think it is your role as the city council to be our mediators, to look for the good of all. And the good of all includes neighbors who have lived in Uptown for a really long time, not just new neighbors who will come in. And so I want you to think about the bigger picture and what your role as elected officials is. Is it to help developers who come from out of state, or is it to help people who live here and elect you?
Thank you.
Thanks.
And also just want to remind people, if you didn't sign in and you came up to speak, please see the clerk and sign in. Is there anyone else interested in speaking? All right, please come on up.
My name is Cannon Apriori, and I'm homeless. I've watched Uptown over the past, 15, 18 years. The world's changing. Minnesota has been a beautiful enclave for prosperity, for families, for a long time. But there's a bias there. Minneapolis and Minnesota has to change. Density, traffic, world's changing, populations are growing. I wanted to come up here and say something sarcastic, but I wanted to be sincere as well. Because I understand a lot of the sentiments and the emotions that are being expressed, but at the same accord, I don't like the nanny state. And I think that right now a nanny state would say, well, the intersections are unsafe and so on and so forth. I've been biking and skating and walking around Uptown since before all the construction. I remember when I felt welcomed in Uptown. I think that if there's more density, maybe there's going to be more people that look like me, and I can feel welcome in Uptown again. Maybe one day I can feel welcome in Minneapolis. Maybe one day I can feel welcome in Minnesota. Till then, cheers. Thank you.
Thank you. Sir, you forgot your phone. Yeah. Anyone else interested in speaking? All right, seeing none, I'm going to close the public part of the hearing and see if there's any questions from council members. Any discussion? Councilmember Allison?
Yes, I would just like to make a motion to deny this appeal. I think that, it's an affluent area. I know that displacement is going on in a lot of parts of the city, especially, the area that I represent. And I think that we're behind on affordable units, but we're also behind on units overall. And this project seems like a reasonable project. I think the graphic where where if you put just kind of like a large box in that area, that's still allowed under the current zoning was really informative for me. And so, yeah, I just want to move that.
Thank you. Is there any other discussions? There's been a motion made. Council President Bittner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just want to first acknowledge how stressful these kinds of developments are for neighbors. And I have a lot of compassion for everything that has been stated here, whether people came to support the project or to oppose it or something in between. You've taken a lot of time. I know neighbors have spent hours door knocking and talking with each other about this. And I know it causes stress, and that's something that's hard to see. This is probably one of the most desirable neighborhoods in the city of Minneapolis. It's right by the lake. It has the Greenway. It has an amazing community school. You can walk to a grocery store, to local businesses, a bookstore. My family walks to all of those destinations all the time from where we live nearby. And I know that the reason so many people came today is because you love your neighborhood, and with such good reason. It is really, truly a beautiful part of our city. This is a huge site, and it was always going to be a big change. It's a surface parking lot in the middle of the city. We knew it was going to redevelop. I want to reassure people that the small area plan wasn't ignored, that when the developer... I'll just wait until people are done responding. When the developer proposed an original building that was more of an R6 building, the city said no. And this building is the scale of an R4 building. So then the big question is about how many people get to live here. And I don't know how expensive the condo units are going to be in the Homes and 31st project, probably multi-million-dollar homes. I can't in good conscience, as an elected official in the city of Minneapolis, force a developer to build multi-million-dollar homes at this location. It just isn't consistent with any of our policies on the promises that I have made when I ran for office. It doesn't make sense to me to say that we could only build 38 units here. Imagine how expensive those units would be, millions of dollars. This is an expensive neighborhood. If you try to find a single family home, the listing prices are $560,000, $495,000, $850,000, $1.2 million, $449,000. These are the current listing prices of single family homes for sale in this neighborhood. This building will have many more 2-bedroom units than we typically see in a lot of the neighborhoods that I represent, which are more of the, if you go farther east to my neighborhood and the lower income neighborhoods that I represent, we tend to get the smaller units, but this will allow for more options in a neighborhood that, again, has so many amenities. This allows an option for a family to live in the community and take advantage of all the amenities. Retirees, like we've seen many move into the other multifamily buildings in the neighborhood. So I support the motion, and I'm really thankful for all of the discussion. And I'll end there. I know Councilmember Arson has to leave.
Councilmember Goodman.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I agree with a lot of what Councilmember Bender has said. I just simply come to a different conclusion. And I do think reasonable people can disagree. For me, in many ways, the small area plan represents the desires and wants of the neighborhood as it fits into the larger context of a city. And this is an approved neighborhood small area plan. While 36 units might not be enough, 155 seems to be a totally different small area plan with completely different zoning. I don't think it's really open to interpretation that 5 stories stepping down to 2 is not the graceful stepping down that the small area plan suggested. My issue is really with the 5-story building, not with the density on Lake Street. I also have no concern about the parking. As I said, if it were me, I probably would build less. So for me, I'm mostly concerned about the impact of projects like this on our future affordable housing goals. It's almost like we have this Republican-esque kind of trickle-down theory going on, that if you just build a lot more, then that will free up units at the lower level. But I more see it as if you build a lot of small, very expensive units per square foot, it's going to increase prices in this immediate area, and I think it will increase prices in the ward I represent directly across the street. I think there are some good things about this project, clearly getting rid of surface parking lots, managing stormwater on site. I think this is a very good developer who has done good work in the city. I've worked with them on many projects, and I think they are admirable as it pertains to being a good local developer. But in the end, for me, I believe the small area plan and the work that goes into it is a contract in a way with the neighbors, and they have a level of expectation that we would attempt to work towards something that would be better and more consistent with the small area plan. If this building was 1 story less, I probably would support it. But I don't see it as something that I personally can support today, although there are many good things about the project to like.
Thank you. Are there any other comments? All right, Councilmember Ellison's motion is before us. I'm going to take the vote. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those opposed? No. The ayes have it, and the motion carries.
Mr. Chair, just for the record too, that with the just to be clear, and for the new members in particular, by denying the appeal, you're effectively affirming the Planning Commission action. So in that regard, you're also adopting the city staff report findings.
Thank you very much.
And also just as a reminder, and I'm sure you know, you still have the rezoning application at issue.
That's a great transition. The next is our last item on the agenda is the rezoning application and alley vacation that are also part of the Sons of Norway project. Considering this committee's actions on the appeal before us today, I'll ask staff to briefly explain these applications and how they relate to our other actions. And if you wouldn't mind doing that very briefly.
Sure. So the rezoning application that's before you today, all rezonings must be affirmed by the City Council. The decision of the City Planning Commission is a recommendation, and the alley vacation is of a similar nature. It's a quasi-judicial city action.
Okay, thank you. Are there any questions and comments? President Bender?
Mr. Chair, I'll move the staff recommendation approving these items 1 through 4 under item 19 on the agenda.
Thank you. Are there any other questions among the committee? All right, President Bender's motion is before this. All those in favor, say aye. 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 All those opposed, say no. Thank you. The ayes have it. And the motion carries. Seeing no further business before us at this present time, I am going to adjourn the committee. Thank you very much.